you know what? Forget the Islam Makhachev fight and forget all the damage that Charles Oliveira has taken throughout his career. It's not so much that at one point he would have been able to take Beneil out and now his chin is beyond the point of no return. What it is that Charles could never beat Beneil Dariush. I get it. We all want Charles to go out there. We want him to spark Beneil Dariush in the first round. We want him to run around the octagon with his little high knees, crying with that favela passion, rubbing his belly, polishing his belt. It's not going to go down like that. We're more likely going to see a sweet baby Jesus speech by Beneil Dariush.
I want to thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
And you know what? I don't mind Beneil Dariush having a little bit of success. He's basically a saint. For crying out loud, he's a missionary. All right? You know, and maybe we need a little bit of that. We're not going to see the favela man come back. I'm sorry, guys. I know you don't like to hear it, but it's not going to happen. And I understand that it's a tough pill to swallow. You don't want to look back at Charles's title run and think that he was only getting those wins because they were favorable stylistic matchups. But that's the name of the game. You win the fights in which you are going against a guy that is favorable for you and your style. And Charles Oliveira cannot fight Beneil Dariush the same way in which he fought Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, and Kevin Lee. All right? He's going to get in there and he's getting knocked out. And I'm going to cut to the point right now. Charles has a glaring hole in his game, and it's a defensive issue. It's not so much that he doesn't move his head, it's that he never protects his chin with his lead hand. And what happens when Charles doesn't protect his chin with his lead hand? He leaves it open and exposed for southpaw fighters like Islam Makhachev, Dustin Poirier, and now Beneil Dariush to catch him with a lead right hook. I want you guys to look at the tape where Charles gets dropped by Islam, where Charles gets dropped by Dustin Poirier. It is with the same weapon, and it's for the exact same reason. He always has his lead hand extended, whether it's to trap punches, parrying punches, or to try to set up that right hand. It doesn't allow him to defend that part of his face, and that's why he keeps getting caught. It's not so much that Charles Oliveira's chin is deteriorating that much. It's just that he's fighting guys that are able to land that shot fairly easily because he can't defend himself properly. That is what it is. Islam Makhachev caught Charles Oliveira with his lead right hook. Dustin Poirier caught Charles Oliveira with his lead right hook. Justin Gaethje caught Charles Oliveira on that same side of his face where his lead hand is with a right hook. Now, Justin isn't a southpaw, but he still caught him with the right hook. And if Beneil Dariush is watching Charles Oliveira tape, he has made this read, and he's going to try his best to expose this. And I am telling you guys right now, if Beneil Dariush lands that shot, Charles is going to go down, and Beneil Dariush, unlike a Dustin Poirier, unlike a Justin Gaethje, will jump right on top of him to capitalize, just like Islam Makhachev did. And that's not even the only issue in his defense. And if you've watched the tape, you've probably noticed this as well. Charles will admire his work and legitimately freeze up in the middle of the octagon and stand stationary after he throws a combination. I've noticed this time and time again. He'll throw a 1-2 down the pipe. All of a sudden, he'll freeze up for a split second. It's like there's a lag in the database. He's just, if he misses a shot, it looks like he's discouraged and he needs to set himself up again. If he lands a shot, he'll look at it for a second. He'll kind of think about what he's doing next. But I don't see urgency in Charles Oliveira. There's not this constant movement. He's not moving his head out of the way after he throws a combination. He's not backing up. He stands there still for what seems like a whole second, and then he'll get cracked for it. And this is another reason why I do not think Charles Oliveira is going to be able to pressure Beneil Dariush all that well. Another thing that we have to take into account is the fact that, you know, we always talk about Charles Oliveira being willing to go into the fire with Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. You guys have to keep this in mind. A lot of the success that Charles had in fighting these guys was the fact that he has the threat of the takedown. It's not just that he doesn't mind getting dropped because these guys aren't going to jump into his guard because they're afraid to deal with him on the ground. It's that they're also fighting with the constant fear of Charles level changing, shooting a double leg down the middle, and taking them down as well. So they constantly have that in their mind. I don't really hear a lot of people mention this for whatever reason. I don't understand why. I guess Charles isn't really shooting that many takedowns as of recent in a lot of these fights, but he does have some pretty underrated wrestling. Like, I've seen Charles ragdoll guys with his wrestling. And that's why we see Charles have so much success in that dirty boxing range and in the clinch, with those nasty uppercuts and those knees to the body that he was hitting Poirier with. This is because in close range, they are terrified of Charles Oliveira, whether it's pulling guard, finding an inside trip. They don't want to get taken down, and they don't want to get tangled up on the ground with them. So when Charles Oliveira is clinching with you, you're not always going to defend your face that well. You're not always going to defend your body because you're really just thinking about stay on the feet, stay standing. And that's how these guys leave themselves open to getting fucked up in the clinch. And this is what he can't do to Beneil Dariush. Surprise, surprise, because Beneil Dariush isn't worried about Charles Oliveira shooting a takedown on him because he has extremely good takedown defense. And what did we see in the Islam fight? He couldn't do that to him because Islam Makhachev has some of the best takedown defense in MMA and is not worried about going to the ground with Charles Oliveira in the first place. And is not going to just get bullied in the clinch because he can also try to land first. He can think striking first in the clinch rather than defend myself from getting taken down because he's such a good grappler that it's just in his back pocket. It's second nature to stuff a takedown. The same thing is true for Beneil Dariush. And I don't think that Charles Oliveira is the level of wrestler that is going to put a guy like Beneil Dariush on notice because Beneil Dariush is a level above Charles Oliveira, just like Islam Makhachev was. He's a better wrestler than Charles. And when he's in those close quarters positions, he can also think strike first rather than just do whatever it takes to stand on the feet and not get taken down by this guy. And if you shut this down, this is basically like you're taking away Charles's bread and butter. I mean, this is what Charles does best. He gets into close quarters and he breaks guys. And then you basically have a handicapped fighter in Charles Oliveira that's constantly, as I had mentioned earlier on, admiring his work, freezing up after throwing combos. And again, another way in which Beneil can shut this down is I've noticed that he fights really well on the back foot. We saw this in the Mateusz Gamrot fight. Look at how Beneil Dariush is fighting a guy like Mateusz Gamrot, someone that's always trying to pressure him. He is keen to sit on the back foot. He's like Tyron Woodley in the sense that he's constantly baiting guys in because he wants them to throw. He wants to counter. That's who Beneil Dariush is. The thing is, when Beneil Dariush counters, when you're trying to close the distance, he is the opposite of Charles Oliveira. This is what makes him so dangerous. Beneil Dariush never admires his work. I will see Beneil Dariush land a 1-2 counter strike, and immediately after, once he shifts his body weight back after landing the 2, he'll land the jab, and then he'll land a 2 again. And here's the difference between Islam Makhachev and Beneil Dariush. When Islam counters you, he'll land 2 shots. He'll land the left hand down the pipe and the lead right hook to follow it up. Remember, both of these guys are southpaws, so their power hand is the left hand. Beneil Dariush, unlike Islam, he's not going to throw 2 punches. No. He'll throw a 10-punch combination while moving forward, and everything that he lands on you is going to be powerful. And that's a nightmare for a guy like Charles Oliveira that just freezes up every now and then after throwing a combination when he gets countered. Beneil is going to literally run him over like a train. And I honestly think that Beneil Dariush is one of the most underrated fighters in all of MMA. And I think I can narrow it down to 3 reasons, or at least these are some of them. Number 1, Beneil Dariush is not intimidating at all. He has a very unimpressive physique. He's not jacked or ripped. He doesn't look like an imposing guy in the cage. He carries himself with a monotoned facial expression at all times. He doesn't have intensity about him. The second reason would be that he's not flashy. Beneil Dariush is a very basic fighter, especially on the feet. Now, he's an elite grappler, and you'll see all the flash there, but you're not going to see this guy throwing like a spinning heel kick or a question mark kick. He's going to stick behind all the basic attacks. Now, he's mastered the basics, which makes him very good, and he's defensively sound as well. He has a lot of power in his hands, but he doesn't win you over with style points all the time, even though he has had some spectacular knockouts, like the spinning back fist knockout over Scott Holtzman and the knockout over Drakkar Klose. And speaking of the Drakkar Klose knockout, this is the third reason why Beneil Dariush's number 1 highlight throughout his career is knocking Drakkar Klose's lights out after being rocked himself. So remember, Drakkar Klose rocked Beneil Dariush. All of a sudden, he's on stilts. He looks like he's a drunk man in the octagon, and then he knocks Drakkar out cold. When people see that, they look at Beneil Dariush, and all of a sudden they think of him like, yeah, he's an elite grappler, but he's a sloppy man on the feet. He's, Homer Simpson out here on the feet. When that's just not the case at all. That's just one instance of Beneil Dariush getting rocked and coming out on top. That doesn't really happen that often throughout his career. And I believe that's one of the main reasons why people look at his striking and just kind of talk about him as this wild man. And don't get me wrong, that's something that makes Beneil Dariush good, is that he is wild and unpredictable at times on the feet. But I think that was overplayed since the Drakkar Klose fight because, again, you're looking at basically a drunk man on wobbly legs in Beneil Dariush, and that can kind of plague your idea of him, when in reality, he's a very defensively sound fighter. All right, so Beneil Dariush doesn't have that much variety to his game. He's not going to do all that much on the feet, but everything that he does do, he does very well. And he has two key weapons other than the lead right hook that he can use to counter with Charles Oliveira. Number one, and you guys have seen this, Beneil Dariush has one of the nastiest overhand lefts in the game right now, one of the best overhands in MMA. Some people have power like Alex Pereira where they'll tag someone with the left hook. It barely looks like they graze their opponent, but all of a sudden you see their opponent laying on the ground, twitching, lifeless. Beneil Dariush is the opposite. When he hits people, it honestly looks like they got kicked in the head by a horse. It reminds me of the perk mule kick in Call of Duty. I don't know if you guys remember that, but I just like the name. When Beneil Dariush hits people, it's like they're getting kicked by a mule. And another thing that I've noticed with that overhand left of Beneil Dariush is he throws it to intercept kicks. He caught Gamrot when Gamrot was throwing a kick. He was catching Thiago Moises time and time again when he was throwing kicks with the overhand. And we know that Charles Oliveira likes to throw a lot of kicks. I could totally see Beneil Dariush trying to intercept one of those with that overhand left. And if he lands that on Charles Oliveira, bro, I'm telling you right now, he's going to come crashing down. The other weapon that I really like from Beneil Dariush is his left kick to the body. It's nasty. I mean, you saw the Gamrot fight. He was mashing Gamrot up with these big body kicks. And I think that left roundhouse kick to the body is going to be Beneil Dariush's key for investment strikes. That's what he can use to kind of slow Charles down a little bit, wear him out. And eventually, Charles is going to get a little bit frustrated. He's going to try to pressure Beneil Dariush up against the cage. And Beneil is going to counter him with an overhand or a lead right hook. He's going to rock Charles Oliveira, and then he's going to jump on him and submit him, or he'll just TKO him. That's my official prediction for the fight. I think that Beneil Dariush is going to knock Charles out. And I could see this happening in the first or second round. Again, I think Charles is going to get frustrated. He's going to try to blitz forward, and he's going to freeze up like he usually does after he throws a combination. He'll just have a lag in the middle of the octagon, and Beneil Dariush is going to come over the top with a lead right hook or an overhand left, and it'll be night-night for Charles Oliveira. So I've already talked about how Beneil Dariush can win this fight in depth, but it's time to give Oliveira a fair shake. How can Charles win this fight? He can get it done. That's the answer. He definitely can get it done. The number one thing he needs to do is chuck fighting like you have a 2-inch wingspan out the window, all right? I don't want to see you trying to dirty box with Beneil Dariush. He's just going to make you pay when you close the distance. The number one weapon I think Charles should use early on in this fight are leg kicks. I think he has some of the best leg kicks in the lightweight division, and they're so fast that even though Beneil Dariush has shown to be able to check leg kicks, I think the speed of those leg kicks from Charles Oliveira will be able to get to the mark, all right? I think he'll be able to land them. And if Charles can smash Beneil's legs early on in this fight, he's going to take away a little bit of sting from the shots of Dariush. And he'll also just be able to slow his movement down overall. So I think that's what Charles needs to do early. Then what I think he can do is land 1-2s down the pipe. When Beneil Dariush's legs are starting to feel it, you start to let your hands go from range. Now, Charles Oliveira has a reach advantage over Beneil Dariush, and if he can actually defend that chin with his lead hand, I think he could be very dangerous with the way he throws that 1-2 down the pipe. We've seen the right hand of Charles and how much power he carries in it in the Gaethje fight. He rocked Gaethje right out of the gate in the first 10 seconds, and then later on in that round, dropped Gaethje on his ass and then was able to submit him. That's what he can do to a guy like Beneil Dariush. If he can land that right hand flush on Dariush, he might send him down and he might be able to knock him out or just jump on top of him and wrap up a submission. So that's the way I see Charles winning. You need to smash the legs early, take away the sting from the punches of Beneil Dariush, slow him down a little bit, and then start throwing some front kicks to the body, straight shots down the middle to keep Dariush out at range, fight behind your reach, keep your lead hand up, and just find a home for that right hand. And if you can land it flush, he can send him flying like he did to Gaethje. And another way that Charles can win this fight, and this is a weakness in Beneil Dariush's game, is that he constantly leaves his neck exposed when he's going for takedowns, because he'll shoot like a takedown in a clinch position up against the fence. He'll go for a double leg, and all of a sudden he's caught in a guillotine against Thiago Moises, or he's caught in a guillotine against a guy like Tony Ferguson. Now, he always gets out of these positions. He has very good submission defense. because he's an elite grappler when he gets on top of guys. But you don't want to get caught with a guillotine against Charles Oliveira. So I do think that if Beneil Dariush gets into a clinch position in the fence against Charles and, lowers his body a little bit too much, Charles can wrap him up in a guillotine. That is the way in which Charles Oliveira can find a submission. Now, as far as the grappling is concerned, we know we're looking at two of the most elite grapplers to ever step foot in the cage. Dariush is as good as it gets in the grappling department. He was able to out-grapple Mateusz Gamrot in their fight, stuff all the takedowns. When Gamrot would get him down, he would find himself twisted up in some weird position from Beneil Dariush. Whenever I see Dariush clinching up against the fence with guys, he's always getting the better of them. He's extremely strong in that position. He could wear on guys there. He's hard to take down in that position as well. And against grapplers, he performs really well. For example, in his fight with Thiago Moises, who is a pretty decent grappler, he dominated him from pillar to post in top position. Was able to tee off on him on the ground with good ground and pound too. Like Islam Makhachev fought Thiago Moises and didn't have as good of a performance against him like Beneil Dariush did. Now, I understand Islam finished Thiago Moises in the 4th round, but that was a 5-round fight, whereas Dariush only had 3 rounds to fight him. But I don't see Beneil Dariush going out there to try to take Charles Oliveira down, especially if he's watching all this footage of all the holes that Charles has in his defense. You'd kind of be a fool to go to the ground early on with such a dangerous man like Charles. Like, you're immediately putting yourself into a 50-50 fight. Or if you really want to be generous to Charles, it's like a 60-40 fight in favor of Charles at that point. So it'd be a pretty big mistake for Beneil to try to take Charles down. Now, that being said, if Charles can take Beneil down, I actually like that for him because I don't know if Beneil Dariush is that dangerous on bottom. And Charles Oliveira has really solid top control as well. I mean, we saw what he was able to do to Dustin Poirier in their fight when he got on top of Dustin in the 2nd round. He rained down with elbows, like really beat the shit out of Dustin Poirier on the ground. He beat the shit out of Tony on the ground too. And I think that there's no man more dangerous than Charles Oliveira on top of you in the cage. Like, that's a nightmare for anyone. So I think if Charles can take Beneil down and he can do it early, the tide is going to shift in his favor. He's going to get momentum from that. He'll gain confidence from it. I don't think it's very likely because Dariush is such a good defensive wrestler, but it's worth the try. Another thing that I want to talk about is the weight cut. This guy is one of the worst weight cuts in all of MMA. I mean, there's basically a fucking drama being filmed every time he cuts weight. You see his team filming videos of each other holding hands, praying for him, playing Brazilian gospel music. Basically, it looks like they're all at a funeral praying for Charles Oliveira. And, we talk about the damage that he's taken throughout his career. That's why he's getting dropped in his fights. I guarantee you a lot of that is the fact that he's drained when he gets into the fight. There's no way that is good for your chin. That's good for your toughness and your durability. And it's just going to get harder and harder as we move forward. His weight cuts are way too dramatic for us to look past it. I mean, there's no other fighter in the game that basically has a whole drama being filmed when they cut weight. How is that conducive to him performing at his best? And we look at Beneil Dariush. He's not that massive of a guy for the lightweight division, but he's still strong. He's still solid, and he does have a pretty underrated chin. Whereas Charles doesn't. It's probably going to be worse today than it ever was before. I don't see Charles Oliveira like losing all this muscle in the offseason. He looks just as big as he's always been throughout the past few years. So I'm guessing it's going to be another battle to cut down to 155. And we're going to see the videos the night before weigh-ins of Charles Oliveira and his team all crowded together, looking like they're at a funeral, like praying for his survival and all that. And then he'll weigh in, he'll look drained. And the next day he's going to get dropped like a sack of potatoes against Beneil Dariush when he gets hit with a big left hand, big overhand left. And that's how I think the fight's going to end, man. That's my official prediction. I think Beneil Dariush is going to catch him with a good shot on the feet, whether it's an overhand left to intercept the kick, whether it's that lead right hook of Beneil Dariush that he can use to catch that part of the chin that Charles doesn't like to defend, or just a 10-punch combination where Charles is sitting looking at his work. As I said, Charles likes to admire his work. He likes to freeze up sometimes in the octagon. And I could see Beneil Dariush running him over like a fucking freight train. So, ultimately, I see Dariush taking this man out. I would love to sit here convinced that Charles is going to go out there a step down in competition. Well, this is a poor man Islam Makhachev, when in reality, that's just not it. If you actually watch Dariush fight, he's extremely good, and he is without a doubt the second best lightweight in the world and could just be the best lightweight in the world. I mean, I really do think that this is Islam's toughest test at 155 pounds next to Alexander Volkanovski. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, it's an unfortunate prediction because I would rather Charles Oliveira win. I'm a massive fan of him, but that's not likely, and he's against the odds. Until next time.